Shalom and blessings in Messiah the Branch. This study is part 5C of the solar calendar, and I would like to finish up my comments and response to the open letter by Charles Pace from December 2015. I began this response in the previous video, part B, 5B. I would like to touch on a few points here that are untrue and deceptive in Charles' letter, open letter to me and to many others. I'll start here in the middle of this page. I believe this is first page. I got down to the previous paragraph. He states here, "Well, Tom, you have finally come around to what I have been trying to teach you about what the rod says in Answer Book 3, page 10, that the calendar is not lunar and that it would be unbiblical to teach otherwise. I have been teaching that for years, and you know that, but as usual you want to act like it was a revelation given to you by the Holy Spirit." Well, in this first couple of sentences, first of all, I have never taught that the calendar is lunar. I always went along with what Victor Houteff said in all of my videos for the last 3+ years, about 3.5 years, going along with exactly what Victor Houteff states in 13 Code 7 and 8, 9 and 10. So that sentence there, the first sentence of this paragraph, is completely false. And the second sentence, he says that he's been teaching this for years. Charles got it from Victor Houteff, Answer Book 3, which is exactly where I've gotten it from. In this next sentence, he says, "Here is the study given in June 2013, where you gleaned most of your ideas from what the rod says about the calendar." Charles, I don't glean anything from the rod. I get everything from the rod. I don't glean most of my ideas. I get all of my ideas from the rod message on the calendar in particular. And I uphold it exactly as Victor Houteff taught it and observed it, the seventh-day Sabbath in particular. This next sentence, "Unfortunately, Tom, you failed to understand the chart. Inspiration refers to the sacred year and its main feast." Well, this chart, which is the chart you're referring to, is exactly the chart I've been referring to in numerous studies in this series. What you have failed to understand, Charles, is the times that Brother Houteff gave here, the actual dates, are true, and they work out correctly according to the solar calendar, the solar ring that encompasses this whole chart. The final sentence in this paragraph, "The Creator's calendar is neither solar or lunar. Here is the link to that study I sent you months ago." Well, I looked at your study, Charlie. This sentence here is exceptionally deceptive. It's so generalized that it is intended to be deceptive. As I clearly read from 13 Code 7, 8, 9, and 10 in Part A of Solar Calendar Part 5A, Victor Houteff differentiates that the weekly cycle is not controlled by solar or lunar. The Creator's calendar, that is the weekly cycle, is neither solar or lunar. But you don't make that distinction, Charles. I do. And I based it exactly on what Victor Houteff stated in the 13 symbolic code statements, where he is specifically teaching against the lunar calendar. So why you would say I was intimating or teaching about the lunar calendar in anything I've presented in the last 3.5 years is completely false. And this last sentence in this paragraph is also completely false because it's so general and deceptive in nature. He goes on to say in the later statement of that very same symbolic code, here it is here, taken directly from a Davidian site, the Bread of Life Davidian site. I covered this carefully in Part 5A of the solar calendar series. He states here that still further in the green, the calendar which the prophets used in both the Old and New Testaments was not lunar, but solar, indicating they did use a solar calendar. That is, for the yearly calendar, or the monthly calendar and the yearly calendar, not the weekly calendar. You don't make that distinction, Charles. This final sentence in this paragraph here in the green, heaven's way of measuring time is therefore not lunar, but solar. He states it twice in this paragraph. How anyone could miss it, or how you could put it forth and not make the distinction, is, as I've said before, highly deceptive. That's why I reject your claims, Charles. Now, going back here, and this is directly from Symbolic Code 13, 9, and 10. Anyone can look this up for themselves. I want to hear you explain this, Charles, and exactly as I have, and exactly as Victor Houteff has, that there is a considerable distinction and difference between the weekly cycle and the monthly and yearly cycle of time in the Hebrew economy, because the weekly cycle is not based on the fourth day of creation, and you won't find any reference to indicate that, and certainly not in 3 Answer Book 11 and 10 and 11. I covered that in a previous video as well. The weekly cycle is continuous, unbroken, and cannot be violated. Otherwise, heaven violated their covenant, creation covenant with mankind, both of the Sabbath covenant and the marriage covenant. And those two stand together or they fall together. Getting back here to the open letter, I'm not going to cover everything in this open letter. Most of it is concerning Charles Pace teaching about himself as the Anointed One, which is the central theme or central teaching in everything he teaches. I don't embrace a man-centered gospel message or a man-centered end-time message. My message is Christ-centered, based on Christ the Son, Christ the Daughter, as the Jonah messengers themselves. The type shows that Christ himself was the Jonah messenger. Therefore, Christ herself is the Jonah messenger in the antitype in our day, in the teachings of Lois Roden. Brother Houteff says where there's a type, there's a truth. There was no messenger outside of Christ himself teaching as a Jonah messenger in his day, before he ascended or after, on the day of Pentecost, or 10 days before. In this paragraph here in the yellow, as the earth orbited the sun and the earth moved 1 degree each day, it was pointed out by the moon to those looking from the earth at night, and that's true, focusing on the celestial backdrop of the Mazzaroth, or the constellations that depict the plan of salvation before the written word was given. That's very true. I accept that, Charles. And this is exactly what Genesis 1 teaches. And I would expect you to get some things right, Charles. You didn't come to us with a pack of lies. You came to us with 99 truths, or 98 truths, and a couple of very serious lies. The enemy never comes in with just a total pack of lies. The Mazzaroth, or the 12 major constellations on the ecliptic, do in fact indicate, or at least originally did, the position of the month that the Earth orbit was in to determine what the feast days were. But that had nothing to do with the weekly cycle. That was the monthly and yearly cycle. As Exodus 12:2 states, this to Moses, this was the beginning of months to them. He did not say the beginning of weeks. The 12 constellations do indeed depict the plan of salvation, and that's been written in other books outside of Adventism, and I have both of those books. Next sentence here, they were called the gospel or good news in the stars. That's very true. The heavens declare the glory of Yahweh. Yes. Tom, you can not see these constellations in the day sky. Charles, I never said you could. I never said that we could. The path around the sun and through the constellations cannot be determined by the sun, as you tried to show with your fancy astronomy program that allows you to make the day sky dark as the night sky. Final sentence here. The Creator did not mean for the sun to rule the night sky, just as you have realized the moon cannot rule the day sky. So you not only contradicted yourself, but you contradicted your Creator's purpose in creating the sun to rule the day sky only. Well, Charles, I'm going to go to that fancy astronomy program right now. In fact, you should get it for yourself so you can teach and demonstrate from the actual motions of the heavens, the sun and the sun-earth relationship, exactly what you're saying. I'm doing it. So you should be able to do it yourself. The basic program is about $80. I don't know if it has all the features that my program has. In fact, I'm sure it doesn't. I have the pro version. And if you do obtain that program, give me a call. I'll show you how to run it, because I want you to have every opportunity to prove what you're saying. Now I'm going to go to that program right now. That dreaded program. Very informative, however. What I've tried to show in previous versions or previous studies here was that there's only 2 days every year that the sun rises and sets due east and due west, and the ancient peoples all around the world, not just Israel, but in most every culture, they kept track of the heavenly movements. They knew how to demarcate all the cardinal points of the compass. On this screenshot here, we can see here one of the cardinal points, due east. These are true compass points, not magnetic. And it was easy for the ancient people to mark this point every year as the midpoint between the oscillations or the variations of the sun along this eastern sky throughout the year. In the wintertime, the sun is way over here somewhere. In the summertime, the sun is way over here to the northeast. Now, when I show this program without daylight and the sun in the sky on this ecliptic line, the green line, by the way, here's the winter solstice point. Since we're coming up to the March equinox soon, I'm using that as a demonstration point. But this is the center point. The ancient people would put for simplification purposes, they'd put a stick or a log or a tall stone on one point where the sun stopped moving northward, in this case, in the summertime, and coming back to the next equinox point, either September or March. They do the same thing. I can move this around. They can do the same thing for the winter solstice somewhere over here. Mark a stick with a maximum variation of the sun in the winter before it starts back northward. And they mark these points very carefully. And they knew that the center point was right here due east every year. Now, once again, for demonstration purposes only, I'm going to remove, for clarity, I'm going to remove the daylight. For clarity, now you can see the cardinal point of the east compass point much clearly. And now I'm going to remove that natural horizon. The absolute horizon line is right there, that white line. And I'm going to I've already got this calendar set. You can see it here. For March 20th, 2016, I'm going to move this back to March 19th. And move the sun gradually to show and demonstrate in real time, or at least simulated, how the sun is going to rise exactly due east that day. This year it happens to be, I think, March 19th. But you can see where the sun is carefully or gradually moving exactly to where it's supposed to be, day by day, moving backwards month by month along this ecliptic line. Although the sunrise comes up in the east, the sun is, because of the earth wobble, the sun is moving backwards on this line month by month until it reaches this very point called the vernal equinox, rising exactly where it should on the day of the equinox, due east, both in the vernal equinox and the autumnal equinox. Now, Charles, I want you to show me what kind of heavenly event, what kind of heavenly natural movement of the Sun-Earth relationship occurs mid-August and mid-February. Please do that, and you'll have to get the program to do so. I don't mind using these programs because they're very instructive. And just so you don't misunderstand here, I'm going to put the daylight back in. I don't need the constellations to tell me what time of the year it is, because Victor Houteff said all we need is the immovable signpost, the equinox. In 3 Answer Book 10 and 11, based on his chart. Now these are the proven and demonstrated natural movements of the Earth-Sun relationship. I'll even go over here to the western sky where the sun is going to set on March 19, 2016. I'm going to speed it up a little bit. 3,000 times its normal speed. You can see that the sun, I'm going to turn off the daylight again, for demonstration purposes only. I don't need the constellations to demonstrate this principle. And you can see, let me double check here, what day. — 2016 here. It says the March equinox is March 19th this year. So once again, removing the horizon, we can see, as all the ancient observers knew very well, all the elders of every tribe and nation who watched these points on their horizon, on elevated horizons, carefully marked out where the sun was going to end up, where it would rise in the east and set in the west. And there it goes, due west exactly. And this is how modern astronomers and calendar makers determine the almanacs and the various charts put out by the Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. I'm moving it backwards one last time to show where it's going to the sun will set on March 19th, 2016. And you can see the readout in the top left corner. The Creator did this, and it's exact. And it's so simple, it can't be missed. We won't be able to use the constellations to determine to validate the monthly cycle or the yearly passage of the months until the moon is restored in its orbit. So I'll give you your daylight back, Charlie, because I know that's important to you. So you see, when you say here that I contradicted myself, you need to be specific on where I contradict myself, Charlie, because I'm going by not only what Victor Houteff taught, I go by the actual demonstrated, simulated motions of the Sun-Earth relationship. Show me your proof, show me your validation of your natural movements of the sun and seasonal changes in mid-August and mid-February, as you've been teaching since 2012, 2011. The remaining parts of this open letter, you say in this bottom paragraph, yet everything you teach and claim to be truth came from the message I taught you. No, Charlie. Like I said, I got everything from Victor Houteff in 3 Answer Book 10 and 11 and other sources, 13 Codes 7, 8, 9, and 10. And that's exactly where you got it from. Only you put a twist on it. You put a complete course change in the direction of the truth of the Advent movement and the established weekly cycle that was validated by Ellen White, James White, and the whole list of them that I've stated in the previous video. Joseph Bates, J.N. Andrews, E.J. Wagner, A.T. Jones, they all wrote studies on the Sabbath. Had there been a violation of or hiding of the weekly cycle by the Romans, by the Jews, or whoever you say that did that, or the Romans, the message in 1844 and 1846 would have been impure. It would have been false, which means this chart is false, falsely depicted, because there are no speckles, no impurities in the first angel's message, second angel's message, third angel's message. And before these three angels' messages, she has the 2300 days and the Sabbath truth listed separately, also free of speckles and impurities. Pure truth. That's what this is. You say here, maybe now you can understand what the chart is depicting about the solar days, not year. A solar year is the number of revolutions of the Earth or days it makes as it orbits the sun. Of course, that's established truth. Hence solar days. If the Earth stood still, there would be no day or even a solar year. Well, of course, that goes without saying. In the blue here, you state, and what proves this is the Earth revolved from evening to morning, not sunrise to sunset. You've redefined that, Charles. The Bible and the early Advent movement founders clearly stated it was sunrise. But from dusk to dawn and back to even, equal day and equal night, for days before the month or season or year began to be numbered by the natural movements of the earth. Well, those are natural movements, of course, but there's no event connected with it, Charles. There's no changeover of the seasons. There's no punctuation of seasonal change in August or February in the middle of those months. You're well over a month off, and I know why you did it. I'm not going to even get into that in this video. That's a separate topic of how you manipulated the twilight tables in 2011. So I'm going to conclude here with my response to this, because all the rest of this is about Charles Pace and how he was raised up and anointed, and which is not according to type, which I've covered in other videos, and I will cover in the two videos in particular after this solar calendar study. Now I've done some of your homework for you, Charles, in trying to find what you're talking about, that somehow the calendar was deviously hidden and or somehow corrupted by the agents of Rome. So I looked online in various other places. Here's a lengthy article on the Hebrew calendar, its history, and you know, if the Jewish scholars and the rabbis had lost track of time, particularly the weekly cycle, it would be somewhere recorded. The interesting thing about Wikipedia is anyone can come in and edit a particular topic. I've actually done it on another Wikipedia page. But anyone, any kind of scholar or anyone that has a varying opinion about something can come in and actually change the Wikipedia article if they have better information or controverted information, but you don't see that on any of these articles about the calendar. Here's the edit function here at the top. And these are established facts, particularly in history concerning the calendar. I'm not going to read through this article. It's quite long, or long enough. I encourage those looking at this video to go to Wikipedia, look up the Hebrew calendar, and read through it. Get familiar with how it operates and whether or not there was some change in their timekeeping way back when. Who knows when? Victor Houteff does say that in the 13 Codes series on the Sabbath, that sometime after Moses and Joshua, the Israelites began keeping lunar time along with solar, and he said very specifically that they were not supposed to do that because the moon in particular had been out of its orbit, out of its original orbit from Genesis 1. And it's now for another purpose, but it's not for the keeping of the monthly cycle and the yearly cycle, and where we are in the yearly feasts progression throughout the year. Prior to this article, there was a good article I checked out come up here in a second, on the Hillel II calendar, which goes back to the 3rd century, 3rd or 4th century of the Common Era, or AD. And the only points in here that this is a short article. I encourage viewers to go to this article as well on Wikipedia. There's no controversy about this. If there was a change in the calendar, someone would know about it. Abraham Lincoln once said, "You can fool some of the people all the time, or all the people some of the time, but you cannot fool all of the people all of the time." That's great word. Those are great words of wisdom from our Civil War president in the early 1860s. And I apply that to your assertion, Charles, that the Roman power hid or changed the calendar, either in 1582 or the Romans themselves back in the early centuries of the 1st century church, or the Apostolic Church, or immediately thereafter. But this Hillel II calendar is the basis of the modern Jewish calendar, and they give some technical information here on how it works. I don't go by this calendar, but it's interesting to track and understand its origin and how it works. It's based on solar lunar, which is the Jewish calendar today. And their main point um, is the greatest concern in this calendar was the fixing of the monthly molad, or the monthly conjunction of the moon, so that they could number their calendar day by day properly. And they've actually been doing this for thousands of years, according to Victor Houteff, since after Moses' time. He says we don't know when it happened, but he says it happened. So this is what we have in the present calendar of the Jews. It's a good article to read. Now, I checked into the history of the calendar itself, the Jewish calendar, in a more general sense. This came off of the Jewish Encyclopedia from the 1906 edition. This was on a Jewish website. I don't know which, I forgot which site it is, but it's easy to find this article, the history of the calendar. And I highlighted every instance in this article. It's a fairly long article. Oh, no, it's not too long. I highlighted every instance where they use the word fixed or fixing. The fixing of a date is not the same thing as fixing an astronomical event. You can read through this article as well. I won't read through it. There's some interesting points in it. But there is, when they talk about the fixing of dates or the fixing of the month, the rabbis got away from the actual visible sighting of the moon, and their fixing of the month applied specifically and only to the moon. The solar year was not tampered with or controverted in Judaism, but the monthly cycle was quite a science for them. They fixed the month based on calculation, not observation, which means they had to do what's called fixing. They didn't wait for just to see the new moon or the conjunction or the last sliver of the moon. They knew that it was so consistent, regardless of its being 29 and a fraction days long, the whole cycle. They knew they could count on it within a matter of a few hours of the first sighting of the sliver of the first moon of the month. So in this particular article, that term is used 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. Even in the section called Error in the Calendar, they're talking about the application of the 19-year cycle of the moon, which fell out of accuracy with the Gregorian calendar, so they had to correct for that on the rabbinic calendar. But there's nothing in here about any kind of weekly cycle issue where they lost track of it. It's a very interesting article. One final article I looked up online just by typing in the words calendar fraud was this lengthy study, very well written, heavily footnoted. It's what I would call university level writing. It's very convincing, very persuasive, and I expected it to be what it was. I am familiar with this kind of study. I may have even looked at this one before, but it talks about the supposed change of the calendar, or that is of the weekly cycle, here in this fourth chapter. And the problem with this study and the whole premise is that it's promoting the lunar Sabbath. And I went to the second, I think it's the second chapter here, History of a Lie. It's only 4.5 pages. And it gives a lot of generalities, but some tremendously troubling and false presumptions, which Victor Houteff dealt with in his study against the lunar Sabbath in 13 code in the 13 symbolic code series studies, 3 of them. And their basis here saying that there's a counterfeit calendar and that the weekly cycle is not continuous. It restarts every month according to the lunar Sabbath theory. They say here at the bottom of the page, the biggest difference between the counterfeits and the genuine calendar is found in the weekly cycle. The pagan Julian Gregorian calendars have a continuous weekly cycle. The original calendar established at creation does not. Well, that's a completely false statement. The weekly cycle restarts with each new moon. Well, Ellen White didn't think so. J.N. Andrews didn't think so. Victor Houteff, Ben Roden, or Lois Roden didn't think so. And I'm going with them. Of course, we agree on this. But I use this just to look for any potential evidence of a cover-up, particularly by the Jews themselves, of the weekly cycle. Whether it was forced on them by the Romans or whether they did it themselves. But they didn't. The Romans at one point, I'll look for the reference here. There is a historical reference here based on the footnotes. I'll have to look for it here another minute, but where they state that the Romans, when they invaded or were conquering just after, before or after the Masada War, prevented the Jews from continuing on with their calendar. And that may be true, but he's talking about their yearly calendar. The Jews never lost track of the weekly cycle, and they did not need a calendar to determine the weekly cycle. People knew the calendar then, the day of the week, not by the Roman names, but they knew the day of the week as we know the day of the week today. Universally, I know what day of the week it is when I wake up in the morning. I don't need to look at a calendar. But he makes one statement here in this chapter. This is actually page 11, page 12. This is the end of this chapter. He makes a statement here that he doesn't footnote. It's a generalization and actually a false statement, because a whole lot of folks that were Sabbath keepers originally have converted over to the lunar Sabbath theory, both Adventists and non-Adventists, Worldwide Church of God, even some Messianics I know. He states here in this second to last paragraph here, first of all, the sentence above it is patently false. Based on all the founders of the Advent movement, the weekdays of the Sabbaths of each lunar month always fall on the exact same dates every month. Well, he's speaking in reference to the lunar Sabbath, but that's exactly what you say, Charles, that the calendar dates and the feast days fall on the same dates every year on the same day of the week. It's a parallel type of theory between this lunar Sabbath and your modified solar Sabbath theory based on the twilight times. Twilight times is still a solar Sabbath determination. This sentence here, he says, after Hillel too fixed the calendar to fit into a Julian framework and moved the observance of the seventh day from the lunar week to the continuously cycling Julian week, difficulties arose. He doesn't give a footnote here. He doesn't have any proof for it. It's an assumption based on over 70 years of this theory being promoted, which Victor Houteff dealt with in his day in the 13 Code series. Sometimes the new moon would appear on Julian days of the week, which caused the annual feast to fall on the wrong days of the new week. As a result, rules of postponement were established, something that was never necessary when the original calendar was in use. He doesn't footnote any of this. There's no references. There's a lot of interesting points, although misapplied in this study. It's quite long. 168 pages. But this is what I mean, Charlie. I look online to try to validate anything of what you're saying on the change of the weekly cycle, and that it was somehow based on the repeating fourth day of creation week every year from either your equinox or the true equinox. It doesn't matter, and I can't find anything on it except from the lunar Sabbath folks. And we agree that that theory is false, just as Brother Houteff taught. As I conclude this final part of the solar calendar series, I want to remind everyone of this very important statement from Inspiration from Ellen White, to remember it and to beware. She says, "The enemy of souls has sought to bring in the supposition that a great reformation was to take place among Seventh-day Adventists, and that this reformation would consist in giving up the doctrines which stand as the pillars of our faith, and engaging in a process of reorganization. Were this reformation to take place, what would result? The principles of truth that God in His wisdom has given to the remnant church would be discarded. Our religion would be changed. The fundamental principles that have sustained the work for the last 50 years would be accounted as error. A new organization would be established. Books of a new order would be written. A system of intellectual philosophy would be introduced. The founders of this system would go into the cities and do a wonderful work. The Sabbath, of course, would be lightly regarded as also the God who created it. Nothing would be allowed to stand in the way of the new movement. The leaders would teach that virtue is better than vice, but God being removed, they would place their dependence on human power, which without God is worthless. Their foundation would be built on the sand, and storm and tempest would sweep away the structure. Who has authority to begin such a movement? We have our Bibles. We have our experience, attested to by the miraculous working of the Holy Spirit. We have a truth that admits of no compromise. Shall we not repudiate everything that is not in harmony with this truth? I hesitated and delayed about the sending out of that which the Spirit of the Lord impelled me to write. I did not want to be compelled to present the misleading influence of these sophistries, but in the providence of God, the errors that have been coming in must be met. In this statement, she is referring heavily to the Dr. Kellogg apostasy in 1903, but she's also seeing a future movement, whether it be the lunar Sabbath theory, which has deeply invaded the Adventist Church and other Sabbath-keeping groups, but also now in the branch with the introduction of the mark of the beast that would not regard or maintain the historical Sabbath of the Advent movement and the Sabbath that the Jewish people never lost. So please keep this in mind in individual study and prayer, and hold on to what we have been given. Stay on the platform of truth, Three Angels' Messages, 2300 Days, Sanctuary Truth, and the Sabbath Truth of 1844 and 1846. Question and prove all things, and hold fast that which is good. 1 Thessalonians 5. Shalom and blessings in the name of the branch.